An Israeli airstrike near a hospital in southern Lebanon just killed 4 people, wounded 127 others, including 39 hospital workers, and blew a hole through the wall of an operating room. And that happened the same day Donald Trump went on Truth Social and declared that both Israel and Hezbollah had agreed to stop fighting. June 1st, 2026, and the ceasefire announcement and the airstrike were separated by hours. Let that sit for a second. The President of the United States declared peace, and simultaneously the walls of a hospital in Tyre came down. This is Professor David. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what just happened in Lebanon isn't just a military story. It's a story about whether American diplomacy means anything right now, whether the word of the most powerful office on earth can actually move a conflict, and what it costs ordinary people when it can't. Let's start with what actually happened on Monday. Jabal Amel Hospital, one of the most important medical facilities in southern Lebanon. The city of Tyre, which you know from ancient history as a Phoenician port, now ground zero in a conflict that has burned through more than 3 months of resumed full-scale war. The Israeli airstrike hit a building directly adjacent to the hospital. The blast tore through the inpatient ward. It destroyed the radiology department, the intensive care unit. One wall of an operating room, gone. Doctors Without Borders, which supports the hospital, confirmed it. The Lebanese Ministry of Health confirmed it. 4 dead, 127 wounded. 4 of those wounded healthcare workers are still in intensive care themselves right now, as of Wednesday, June 3rd, still critical. And here's something the numbers don't quite capture. The day before this strike, a nearby facility called Hiram Hospital, also MSF supported, was also hit. 13 healthcare workers injured in that attack alone. 2 hospitals, 2 days, same city. And Doctors Without Borders put out a statement that reads like an organization that has genuinely run out of diplomatic language. They called it a grave failure to protect the medical mission. That's the language you use when you've exhausted every other framing. Israel's stated position is that Hezbollah uses civilian infrastructure, hospitals, apartment buildings, neighborhoods, as cover for its military operations. The IDF said it was targeting a Hezbollah position near the hospital. The hospital staff, speaking to the BBC, categorically denied that Hezbollah operates from or near Jabal Amel. They said it is a civilian hospital, full stop. And here's where this becomes genuinely complicated, because both things carry weight. Israel has documented cases of militant infrastructure embedded in civilian areas across this conflict. But international humanitarian law doesn't permit destroying a hospital because you believe something bad is happening nearby. The protected status of a medical facility doesn't evaporate because of an allegation. According to Human Rights Legal Analysis, which came up in the context of the 2024 Beirut Medical Center strike, even a hospital with organizational affiliations retains protected status under international law. That's not a political opinion. That's the law of armed conflict. But let's step back further, because the hospital strike is actually the smaller story inside a much larger one. And the larger one involves a phone call that reportedly got very loud very quickly. Here is what we know about Monday's diplomacy. Trump went on Truth Social at roughly 1:29 p.m. Eastern Time and announced that he had spoken to Netanyahu, spoken through intermediaries to Hezbollah, and that both sides had agreed to halt hostilities. No troops would move on Beirut. Shooting would stop. He called it a productive outcome. Hours later, Israeli forces continued striking southern Lebanon. 8 more people killed in the south on Tuesday, the day after the announcement. By Tuesday night, the ceasefire that Trump declared was, in practice, not happening. And then there's what reportedly happened on that phone call before the post. 2 separate sources, cited by CNN and confirmed in broader reporting, said Trump used expletives. One report from Axios described Trump yelling at Netanyahu. The word quoted in Israeli and American press was direct and profane, asking him what exactly he thought he was doing. The White House doesn't dispute the call happened. One source said Trump warned Netanyahu that the escalation toward Beirut would further isolate Israel globally. Another source reported that Trump, in that same call, told Netanyahu he had helped keep him out of prison, referring to Trump's public support for Netanyahu amid his ongoing domestic corruption trial. Whether that's leverage or just Trump being Trump, you can decide. But the fact that it's in the reporting at all tells you something about the texture of this relationship. Here's what happened inside Israel after Trump made his announcement. Netanyahu's office released a statement saying Israeli forces would continue operating in southern Lebanon as planned. Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a statement denying there was a ceasefire at all. And then Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister who is a critical member of Netanyahu's governing coalition, went on X and wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because the quote belongs to him, that it was time for Netanyahu to tell Trump no. His words were that a strong prime minister says yes when possible and no when necessary, and that this was the moment to say no. Think about what that means for a moment. A sitting cabinet minister publicly calling on his prime minister to defy the sitting president of the United States in real time. Not in private, not in a leaked memo, publicly, on social media, while a ceasefire is being announced. That's not normal alliance behavior. That's a coalition partner calculating that his domestic political base values the war more than they value Washington's goodwill. Former Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, from the opposition, chimed in too. He called it unacceptable that Israel hadn't struck Beirut's Dahia suburb. He said soldiers were being killed while Netanyahu waited for Trump's permission to bomb. The political pressure on Netanyahu from the Israeli right is not some background noise. It is the central fact shaping his decision-making. Every time there's a possibility of de-escalation, the far right of his coalition treats it as a political threat to themselves. Their voters want the war expanded, not contained, not managed, expanded. And so here we are. Trump declares a ceasefire. Netanyahu says operations continue as planned. His defense minister denies the ceasefire exists. His national security minister publicly tells him to reject the American president. And in Tyre, a hospital has a hole in its operating room wall. Now let me give you the timeline, because context here is everything, and it's being lost in the noise. The 2024 ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, brokered by the US and France, took effect November 27, 2024. It was supposed to be a 60-day pause leading to a permanent end of hostilities. It expired in March 2026. By that point, Israel had continued striking Lebanon and had maintained forces at 5 positions inside Lebanese territory, in violation of both the ceasefire terms and UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Hezbollah restarted active hostilities on March 2, 2026. Within weeks, Israel launched what it described as its most powerful strikes on Lebanon since the 2006 war. Over 3,400 people have been killed in Lebanon since March, more than 10,000 wounded. Ground fighting has been concentrated around Bint Jbeil in the south. Israel blew up the main bridges over the Litani River to cut off supply lines. In April, a new ceasefire, this time a 10-day truce, was brokered by the US and announced by Trump on April 22nd. It was extended for 3 weeks. It also collapsed. So what you had on Monday, June 1st, was the third major attempt at de-escalation since the war resumed. And by Tuesday, June 2nd, people were still dying. Both sides accusing the other of violations. Israel saying operations continue. Hezbollah saying they agreed to the American proposal through the Lebanese embassy in Washington. There's something almost structurally broken about this. Every ceasefire creates a political window, and every political window gets filled with the next set of attacks before anyone can walk through it. You'd be forgiven for asking whether a ceasefire at this point is a genuine diplomatic tool, or whether it's a kind of performance, a way for everyone involved to claim they tried, while the conditions that make stopping the war politically costly for key actors remain entirely unchanged. Let's talk about Iran for a moment, because Iran is the thread that runs through all of this. Iran and the US have been in nuclear talks. Those talks are sensitive, fragile, and apparently directly connected to what happens in Lebanon. Iran announced on Monday that it was suspending peace negotiations with Washington, citing Israeli strikes in Lebanon and Gaza as a violation of the spirit of the US-Iran ceasefire framework around the wider Iran war. Trump acknowledged there had been a glitch, but said he turned it around quickly. Iran walking away from the table, even temporarily, isn't a minor thing when you're trying to manage a regional conflict that is already drawn in Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran's nuclear program all at once. Qatar was involved in brokering contacts over the weekend before Trump's announcement. White House envoy Amos Hochstein was traveling to Beirut for continued talks. The U.S. informed Qatar that it had instructed Israel to cancel the planned strikes on Beirut before Trump made his social media post. So the American diplomatic machinery was genuinely moving on Monday. It wasn't theater. And yet by Tuesday morning, the strikes continued. This brings you to the fundamental tension that has defined this entire conflict since October 2023, and it's only gotten more acute. The United States wants de-escalation. American financial markets don't love regional instability. American relationships in the Gulf require some level of Arab confidence that Washington isn't simply going to rubber stamp unlimited Israeli military action. And Trump specifically needs the Iran nuclear talks to succeed. That would be a transformative diplomatic win. All of those things point toward restraint. But Israel's governing coalition, the actual political structure that keeps Netanyahu in power, doesn't want restraint. Ben-Gvir's party, Lieberman's posturing, the settler movement's logic applied to Lebanon, they want Hezbollah destroyed. Not deterred, destroyed. And Netanyahu, who is simultaneously managing a corruption trial, a fractious coalition, and a war on multiple fronts, has to calibrate between what Washington wants and what his political survival requires. That's not a comfortable position, and the gap between those two things is the space in which hospitals get struck and ceasefires get announced and then ignored, and people keep dying and tire. Now let's bring this down to something concrete. A baby was born at Jabal Amel Hospital shortly after the strike on Monday, a boy named Faris. BBC reported it. His mother had just given birth. The building next door was destroyed, shattered glass, staff injured around her. Faris came into the world in a hospital with a hole in its operating room. That is the distillation of what civilian cost actually looks like when you get past the statistics. 4 dead, 127 wounded are numbers. Faris is a face. The MSF report on Jabal Amel is worth sitting with. The ICU was compromised enough that they had to transfer half their patients to another ward immediately after the strike just to keep them alive. The cardiac care unit was damaged. The radiology department was damaged. This is not a facility that can simply open a different wing. This is the main hospital serving a city and its surrounding region in an active war zone. Reducing its capacity doesn't just affect the people currently admitted. It affects every future casualty, every heart attack in the next month, every complicated birth, every person injured in whatever strikes come next. And the Hiram Hospital strike the day before, that wasn't even widely reported in the same breath as Jabal Amel. 13 healthcare workers hurt. It happened. It got some coverage. And then Jabal Amel happened, and Hiram dropped to a footnote, which is itself a data point about how normalized this has become. There's a financial dimension to this that American viewers should be tracking. Lebanon's economy was already in a collapse that began years before this war, one of the most severe economic collapses of any country in modern history, according to World Bank assessments from a few years back. The banking system effectively seized. The currency lost the overwhelming majority of its value. And now you have a new full-scale war that is destroying whatever economic infrastructure remained. The port of Beirut, already damaged in the 2020 explosion, is under pressure. Southern Lebanon, which was already poor and underdeveloped, is being systematically devastated. This is a country that will require reconstruction on a scale that is genuinely hard to fund even in the best of circumstances. And the best circumstances are not present. For the United States, the direct financial exposure is primarily through military aid to Israel, which has continued, and through the diplomatic cost of being seen as either complicit in or unable to stop attacks on medical facilities. That diplomatic cost has a real price. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Gulf states are all watching. The Abraham Accords framework that Trump has been trying to expand depends on Arab governments being able to sell normalization with Israel to their own populations. Every hospital strike, every civilian death that plays on Arab social media makes that sell harder. And a stalled Saudi-Israel normalization has direct implications for oil diplomacy, for regional investment frameworks, for the whole architecture of American influence in the Gulf. So when you ask why any of this matters to the American economy and American interests, it's not that one hospital strike tanks a market. It's that the accumulation of these events shapes the credibility of American mediation, the viability of regional diplomatic architecture, and the geopolitical stability that energy markets are priced against. Oil didn't spike dramatically on Monday, but the risk premium is quietly building, and risk premiums don't announce themselves until they do. Trump's position in all of this is genuinely unusual. He wants to end the conflict. He reportedly told Netanyahu he was furious. He used diplomatic leverage, including explicit personal references. He got Hezbollah to say yes. He got Lebanon to say yes. And he got Israel's defense minister to publicly say no ceasefire exists. That's a strange outcome for the most powerful head of state on earth to produce. It either means the leverage he has isn't sufficient, or the domestic political constraints on Netanyahu genuinely exceed even Trump's pressure capacity. Or there's a negotiation still in motion that Monday's announcement was only one move in. Fresh Lebanon-Israel talks reportedly began in Washington on Tuesday. The IDF slightly eased some movement restrictions in northern Israel, which is being read as a partial confidence-building measure. Hezbollah reportedly threatened to hit Tel Aviv if Israel bombs Beirut's Dahiyeh. So you have simultaneous diplomatic progress and simultaneous escalatory threats. That's the environment, both tracks moving at once. What happens next is genuinely unclear, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either more optimistic or more cynical than the facts warrant. The pattern so far, since October 2023, has been ceasefire attempts followed by collapse, followed by escalation, followed by another ceasefire attempt at higher stakes. Each iteration of that cycle leaves more dead, more infrastructure destroyed, more displaced people, and a harder diplomatic environment for the next attempt. Tyre has now been hit enough times that its ancient Roman ruins have been endangered. That's the scale of what's happened to this city. For the people in Jabal Amel Hospital right now, the 4 staff members still in intensive care, the patients in wards with blown-out windows, the nurses navigating a compromised facility in an active conflict. The question of whether Trump's ceasefire holds, or Ben-Gvir's position wins, is not an abstract political question. It's the difference between whether help can get to them or whether the next strike comes before the glass gets swept up. The deeper question underneath all of this, the one that doesn't have a clean answer, is whether any external actor, including the United States, can actually end this, or whether this conflict has reached a point where the internal political logic on both sides has become more powerful than any external pressure. Netanyahu needs his coalition. Hezbollah needs to exist as a resistance force with a military purpose. The moment it permanently disarms, it loses its reason for being. Those two things are structurally incompatible with a lasting peace. And the civilians of southern Lebanon and northern Israel keep paying the interest on that incompatibility. If a president of the United States calls the prime minister of Israel and reportedly yells at him in profane terms, gets Hezbollah to agree to stop shooting, announces it publicly, and by the next morning the strikes have resumed and the defense minister is denying the ceasefire exists, what does that tell you about how much further this has to go before something actually holds? This is Professor David. I'll see you in the next one.